It was called the greatest street party on earth. November 1989, I wasn't there, you probably weren't, and we don't have street parties anymore anyway. But tens of thousands of people armed with pickaxes and candles, flower bouquets and champagne bottles had flooded onto the streets of Berlin to bring down the concrete wall that marked the front line of the Cold War. It was a turning point in history, and about the same time, a secret manifesto began to be written in the United States Defense Department on how to build the new world that came after that party. America's strategic aim, this draft defense planning guidance for 1994-99 read, was to prevent the re-emergence of any new rival. It concluded, we must maintain the mechanisms for deterring potential competitors from even aspiring to a larger global role. No more Soviet Union. Well, for weeks now, upwards of 100,000 Russian troops have been massed along the country's borders with Ukraine. Some of those troops have pulled back, and efforts are being made to defuse the immediate crisis. But there's a wider issue that countries like India need to be paying close attention to. Like China, a resurgent Russia is laying claim to a sphere of influence or control of the affairs of nation-states on their peripheries. The Cold War was supposed to have brought the curtain down on such territorial claims. But it's clear the age of great powers didn't end with that street party, and this secret document helps understand how we got here and why finding a durable solution isn't going to be easy. Even as the Berlin Wall fell, the United States and the former Soviet Union began negotiations over the limits of their power in Europe. The Soviet Union had lost partners like Hungary, Poland, East Germany, and they didn't want the US taking advantage to move eastwards. Well, the US seemed willing to address Soviet concerns over the disintegration of their sphere of influence. I very much want you to know neither the President or I intend to extract any unilateral advantage. A declassified document records President Ronald Reagan's emissary, James Baker, telling the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev. Then came the money line. Not an inch of NATO's present military jurisdiction will spread in an eastern direction. For generations, the great powers had split the world up among themselves. In 1823, President James Monroe claimed all of the Americas as the United States sphere of influence. President Franklin Roosevelt, after the Second World War, called for four horsemen, America, the UK, the Soviet Union and China, to secure the world. Even during the Cold War, the great powers of the West stood aside as Soviet forces crushed uprisings in Czechoslovakia, Hungary and Poland. The collapse of the Soviet Union, though, led to a certain hubris in Washington. The author of the defense planning guidance I told you about, the mathematician turned neoconservative ideologue Paul Wolfowitz, believed that the limits the Cold War had placed on American power no longer existed. It was now the sole hegemon. Even though the leak of Wolfowitz's draft provoked sharp criticism, a watered-down version that couldn't be accused of imperialism was eventually adopted. The text informed America's thinking. The United States invaded a number of countries where they didn't like the regime, from Iraq to Panama to Slobodan Milosevic's genocidal regime in Serbia. For many in the US, this led to what came to be known as the liberal world order. For many in the US and elsewhere, this new liberal order seemed a moral one. Each country had the right to make its own foreign policy and also to be held account for violations of shared norms. But there was a catch. As the scholar Robert Kagan has argued, a liberal world order, like any world order, is something that is imposed. And much as we in the West might wish it to be imposed by superior virtue, it is generally imposed by superior power. From the mid-1990s, the superior power of the West led NATO to drift eastward slowly, encompassing former Soviet satellites in Eastern Europe like Poland and the Baltic states. For many Russian leaders, though, this seemed like an existential threat. Their anxieties were fueled by the long and brutal war against Islamist insurgents in Chechnya, which raised the specter of Russia itself splintering and America taking advantage. Wolfowitz's guidance document had called for Washington to be mindful that democratic change in Russia is not irreversible and that despite its travails, Russia remains the strongest military power in Eurasia and the only power in the world with the capability of destroying the United States. To Russians, it seemed like NATO's eastward drift was meant to dismantle whatever remained of their power. Even Russian liberals agreed. Grigory Yavlinsky argued, talk that this is a different NATO, a NATO that this is no longer a military alliance, is ridiculous. It's like saying the hulking thing advancing towards your garden is not a tank because it is painted pink, carries flowers, and plays cheerful music. It does not matter how you dress it up. A pink tank is still a tank. Events came to a head in 2014 when a mass movement deposed Ukraine's pro-Russian president, Viktor Yanukovych. The Kremlin believed, rightly or wrongly, that the US had sponsored the popular uprising against Yanukovych. In response, President Vladimir Putin annexed the Crimea and Donbas regions of Ukraine, and that's where things stand today. The US has warned that this time around it would respond to a Russian invasion, and I quote, decisively and impose swift and severe costs. President Joe Biden's dislike for Putin is well known. He once called Vladimir Putin a killer and warned that he would pay a price. What's less clear though is if the US actually has the appetite for war to defend its small European partners and allies. What does decisive really mean? Likely, even though the Russians are withdrawing, Putin believes that he's won his argument. Russia has hundreds of thousands of troops on hand around Ukraine and will keep having them. The United States does not. For several reasons, Putin's power play and his assessment of its outcome is probably right. There are many in Europe who don't want confrontation, ever more dependent on Russian gas because it switched off its last nuclear reactor and will ban coal-fired power by 2038. Germany will depend for power on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project, which it's pushed ahead with in the face of sanctions against Russia. French leaders, for their part, worry America is pushing Russia further into China's embrace and should hold back. Even though European Union and United States sanctions have hurt the Russian economy moreover, it shows no signs of collapse. Indeed, Russia has grown its foreign exchange to record levels last year, probably giving it a buffer in the event of a long crisis. But stepping back from this confrontation will also have real consequences for America's global reach and power. Consider this. What will failing to confront Russia mean for the credibility of American promises to allies in Europe and Asia that it will defend them? How far westwards might Russia push forward its sphere of influence in the future? And what lessons will China, which has already been bullying smaller nation states along its peripheries in Asia, draw from this crisis? Can India really count on the United States to act as a protector in the event of a war with China? Can the Philippines or Vietnam or Japan or the Koreas depend on Washington? There's no telling how this power struggle in Ukraine will end. But one way or the other, it will shape India's world for decades to come. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm National Security Editor at ThePrint.